Alright, we're here, part 3, watching the stolen history of all religions, part 5, when the survivors awake, of Atlantis awake. Or wake up, sorry. Oh, sorry it's late.
The conclusion of his research is that initially the Quran evolved from what he calls Islamo-Christian songs. All of Aleppo was a Christian monk who was accompanied.
So Antioch. So if you look at Antioch, there's Antioch in South America, and it's called Antigua today. And everywhere there's evidence of this history, like Ignatius of Antioch. If you come back up here, Patriarch of Antioch, Antigua in South America was called Antioch prior. So that's why you used to have so much these churches up in areas, because they came and they conquered, man.
The Orthodox Christian Patriarch Macarius Zain in his travels. The book is called The Travels of Macarius. So the question arises, in what language was this book written? The supporters of this Caligari theory, of course, will reply that this Orthodox Christian monk who was traveling with his Orthodox Christian father and staying in an Orthodox Christian country, Russia, would write his book in Russian or maybe also in Old Greek language. Or maybe, in the worst case scenario, it would be in Latin. However, the book is written in Arabic, and not only that, but inside this book, he writes, of course, will reply that this Orthodox Christian monk who was traveling with his Orthodox Christian father and staying in an Orthodox Christian country, Russia, would write his book in Russian or maybe also in Old Greek language. Or maybe, in the worst case scenario, it would be in Latin. However, the book is written in Arabic. And not only that, but inside this book, he writes actually in Russian language, but written with Arabic letters. To avoid this uncomfortable situation, modern historians declare that Paul must have been of Arabic origin, without any proof, of course. And even if we assume that he was born in an Arabic environment, still his book puts a very valid and a big question mark next to the approach of the modern historians, who automatically put an equation mark between anything written in Arabic and Islam. That is a widespread practice, and it has been adopted as if it is self-evidently valid, although it does not have any proof at all. And now, this is an original 17th century mantle of an Orthodox Russian priest kept in the Uglitch National State Museum. All inscriptions on it are written only in Russian and only with Slavic letters. The inscriptions are fully readable, and there is a clear mention of the Holy Cross and the Holy Resurrection. However, the very top row, in absolutely clear and well-preserved Slavic letters, it is written Allah, Allah. I hope it is becoming clear, all those lies that the Arabic inscriptions on the helmets of the kings were just flowery elements, and the kings had no idea what kind of decoration they were. No. So, in absolutely clear and well-preserved Slavic letters, it is written Allah, Allah. I hope it is becoming clear all those lies that the Arabic inscriptions on the helmets of the kings were just flowery elements and the kings had no idea what kind of decoration they were. No. Gederstein, a German ambassador, visited Russia centuries ago, and this is an authentic illustration that he published for his journey at the time it happened. Just have a look what kind of outfit is the Russian king wearing. We would classify now this as purely Muslim, but this is not the reality. This style of clothing was adopted all over the territory, which was influenced by the culture of the survivors. This is the symbol of the town Halle in Germany. It is a traditional symbol, of course, that is still in use. However, it looks too Muslim, and that is why a new explanation has been fabricated without any basis, of course, that this actually is a symbol of salt. Yes, salt, pepper, oranges, bananas, everything else except the truth. Edla is an archaeological site in Syria. The famous clay tablets were found there, and in the beginning, when an Italian translator started working on them, everything seemed as usual. However, when the translations were published, it became clear that they are changing the history as we know it. One of the things that was mentioned by the translator, that actually the history of all religions together is different. The translator was personally threatened and forced to even renounce his existing translations and to stop translating further. In 2013, during the war in Syria, the place where the tablets and the research papers on them are kept was bombed and destroyed. This is an actual footage of the situation after this bombing. The forces of evil were not satisfied with merely sending events back in the historic timeline. They also embarked on the task of presenting the local governors and rulers of the various provinces of the Empire of the Survivors as independent rulers to cover up the traces of the survivors. Second, they created tons of fictionally phantom events and persons to fill up the artificially manufactured gap of the 1000 years shift back in history and also the other shifts. That was a lot of vacant space and time in history that needed to be filled up with something artificial. That was not difficult in the historic timeline. They also embarked on the task of presenting the local governors and rulers of the various provinces of the Empire of the Survivors as independent rulers to cover up the traces of the survivors. Second, embarked on the task of presenting the local governors and rulers of the various provinces of the Empire of the Survivors as independent rulers to cover up the traces of the survivors. Second, first, to cover up the traces of the survivors. First, to cover up the traces of the survivors. First, to cover up the traces of the survivors. Second, they created tons of fictionally phantom events and persons to fill up the artificially manufactured gap of the 1000 years shift back in history and also the other shifts. That was a lot of vacant space and time in history that needed to be filled up with something artificial. That was not difficult to achieve because in various areas the people had different names for the same person. For example, Charles is in French, but the same person in England will be called Charles. And yet, if we go to Spain, the same person would be Carlos. In this way, the same person would be reflected in the history of various nations under a different name, and the events that he is involved in person in England will be called Charles. And yet, if we go to Spain, the same person would be Carlos. In this way, the same person would be reflected in the history of various nations under a different name, and the events that he is involved with will be similar, however not exactly the same. Many such phantom events or doubles of the same have been discovered and studied by the historians who are contributing to the new chronology project that evolved around the work of Anatoly Fomenko. The next task of the fabricators of the history was to ascribe the knowledge and culture that the survivors brought to various uncivilized nations and tribes as local. They always try to assure us that the tribes naturally evolved and learned, discovered how to do things just like that by themselves. The next task of the fabricators was to misrepresent the various groups of survivors and always provide some sort of explanation that these were actually local people or they came from somewhere else, but that they were not actually what they were, and things like that. Twisting the these were actually local people or they came from somewhere else, but that they were not actually what they were, and things like that. Some sort of explanation that these were actually local people or they came from somewhere else, but that they were not actually what they were, and things like that.
Just like the French,
the original pure spiritual knowledge
the
spread
natives
by
to
the survivors was vital for the parasites. On one side, they absolutely had to deprive the humans of their true spiritual path so that they can render them powerless as they forget their true nature of magical interdimensional beings. And the parasites managed to put most of us in very tiny boxes of existence and convince us that this is all that is. There is nothing outside of this small box and we live inside it. On the other side, the new parasitic colored versions of religions became very convenient in starting wars. And wars are favorites for the parasites. Not only the humans kill each other without any external help, but also it gives a pleasure to the parasites because that is exactly their very nature. It is one of suffering and misery and pain. As far as Christianity is concerned, there is almost no point discussing it. So much has been written, and so many people have expressed their legitimate concerns that in its most popular form nowadays, it has very little to do with the mission of Christ or his person. There is plenty of evidence and historic artifacts pointing towards the fact that Christianity, Islam, and in fact all world religions have a common source. The Vedas, the religious scriptures of India, underwent a relatively much less parasitic edition than the other scriptures around the world. Some minor changes could have been made in them during the times of the couple of language reforms when people were forced, the Brahmins were forced to rewrite their books in a new language. Although such reforms could have made some points blurry, like for example the count of the ears, still the main message made it through. And as far as Buddhism, Buddha himself was born and raised within the environment of Vedic culture. So, in one sense, Buddhism is kind of a branch of what we call Hinduism. But sadly, not all Hindus today understand this true message that came to them through the centuries. The reason for this is the heavy pollution on their consciousness on the side of the modern culture. Within the environment of Vedic culture, so in one sense, Buddhism is kind of a branch of what we call Hinduism. Is kind of a branch of what we call Hinduism. Is kind of a branch of what we call Hinduism. But sadly, not all Hindus today understand this true message that came to them through the centuries. The reason for this is the heavy pollution on their consciousness on the side of heavy pollution on their consciousness. Heavy pollution on their consciousness. Heavy pollution on their consciousness on the side of the modern culture. For example, this is a set of desktop items. Most of us, when we look at them, we either understand very quickly what they mean, or we can find out quickly and easily learn what they mean. But to a member of uncontacted tribe from the Amazon jungle, these pictures will mean either nothing or something completely different than the meaning in the context of the IT technology that we understand so easily.
So you must remember,
extremely difficult to use the paleography to verify the chronology.
they manipulated the timeline, inflated it, doubled histories, and echoed it through time.
Particularly in ancient times. I mean, in modern times, we know to some extent how things get dated. But imagine you're a historian, okay, from say 300 AD or to 500 AD, possibly even 1200 AD or later. First of all, it's not entirely clear that your intention in writing history is the same as the intention of the modern historian, namely to give a faithful chronicle of events. We cannot take this for granted at all. As a matter of fact, it's a fair assumption that many ancient writings had a sort of moralistic purpose. They were much more in keeping with, like Roman histories was showing, the grandeur of certain figures, giving uplifting accounts, and so forth. This is very, very important because the results that we're talking about are in some cases are going to look and seem so preposterous to you that you will be very tempted to just turn your mind off or turn your back to the whole thing. And what Ellen and I are above all trying to do is not make you throw out the data. You may discard Flamenco's interpretation of the data. You may discard the interpretations that we have of the data, but you shouldn't throw out the data. In my opinion, the data is throw out the data. In my opinion, we have of the data, but you shouldn't throw out the data. Throw out the data. In my opinion, of the data, but you shouldn't throw out the data. In my opinion, the data is incontrovertible. You see on the right-hand side, this is the...
You get a million really to make anybody get any...
Or even what the people really understood by it.
I don't think anybody is in any position really to make a hypothesis. You get a million ideas occurring to you when you really look into this. Many people that I talk to, they want to get a hypothesis, they want to go off and run with it, to the exclusion of everything else before they understand anything about really what's going on. And I think that people have no business making hypotheses about this until they really understand the extent and the depth and the weight of what he has done. I mean, any really nailed down hypothesis. Obviously, lots of crazy ideas are going to occur to you, but, because they occur to me all the time, and I try to follow them out as much as I can, but, we are not making hypotheses here, because really we're not in a position to.
Remember the little pattern up here? Okay, where we have a little block of history here, and then we shift it back and so forth. Flamenco's opinion is the only legitimate history. Now, this doesn't mean that nothing happened before this. The only history that our documents address themselves to is from the period of 300 AD up to modern times. Everything else is a projection of that material, that historical material, back in time, due to the errors that scholars made in trying to synchronize relative blocks of history. Remember, there are three shifts. The one's 333 years, one due to the errors that scholars made in trying to synchronize relative blocks of history. Due to the errors that scholars made in trying to synchronize relative blocks of history. Remember, there are three shifts. The one's 333 years, one is 1,053 years, and the other one is 1,778 years. He has an account of each one of these and how these could have happened historically to produce those shifts. But his is what we might call one radical interpretation. Now, before you say this guy's out of his mind, what Fomenko does is a pair of duplicates. What Fomenko does is says, well, can we establish astronomically which one is valid? So take, for example, Thucydides' Peloponnesian Wars. There are three eclipses mentioned in the Peloponnesian Wars. They're described with great fullness. There's a lunar eclipse, an annular solar eclipse, and another lunar eclipse. You can infer what the path of totality was and the whole deal from these descriptions. The creators of modern chronology, namely Scaliger and Petavius, tried to astronomically solve the problem of those eclipses. Were not able to do it without leaving out some of the data provided by Thucydides, who, by the way, says he was a witness of this. So what Fomenko did, he said, let's make no presuppositions about this. Where are the exact astronomical solutions for this triad of eclipses? And there turns out to be one in the 11th century AD and one in the 12th century AD, and no others. So what Fomenko does quite regularly is when he will appeal to astronomical arguments to try to determine which is the principal one, and does quite regularly is when he will appeal to astronomical arguments to try to determine which is the principal one, and his conclusion, and however crazy it may sound, is extraordinarily well argued, is that the only legitimate history is the modern history from about 300 on, and most of that, by the way, is from 900 on. From 300 on, we got like statuary documents and things like that.
He thinks most of the things that we think of as historical events really did happen, but the question is when and where, and maybe, of course, how many times. And he thinks, well, it didn't happen 10 times, it only happened once, and most of that stuff happened after 900.
Yeah.
The question is when and where, and maybe, of course, how many times. And he thinks, well, it didn't happen 10 times, it only happened once, and most of that stuff happened after 900.
Yeah. By the way,
question is when and where, and maybe, of course, how many times. And he thinks, well, it didn't happen 10 times, it only happened once, and most of that stuff happened after 900.
Yeah. By the way, and it's something that we need to find out more about. Fomenko applies his statistical methods not just to European history, but also to Middle Eastern history, including Egypt, India, and so forth, and it's riddled with repetitions of the same kind.
Would that not seem to indicate, that's almost the most fascinating part, I mean, either the whole thing is a fudge, or astronomically, astrologically, it's repeating itself. When you look at the
You have no idea how tempting that is. As Ellen mentioned, there was a tradition of studying history astrologically. It starts in the Arab world with an old series of people. The most definitive treatise was written by a man named Abu Mashar. He uses, for the astrologers in the office, in the room, he uses Jupiter-Saturn cycles, which have a tendency to occur in the same, what's called the same triplicity, in the same triplicity of signs for long periods of time, except they drift slightly, and every 240 years they change triplicity, and every 960 years they return to the same degree. Now, these methods were translated into Latin, but they were used by all medieval Latin chronologers. In other words, what are you going to do to write history if you don't have any documents? You use astrology.